大家好，我是 Jenny， 欢迎来到沉思者 J。今天我们要聊两个人，一个来自印度，一个来自南非，他们相隔半个世纪，灵魂却如此相似。一个叫甘地，一个叫曼德拉，他们都用一生对抗强权，他们都改变了历史的方向。今天这一集很特别，我们要把两位大师放在一起，看看非暴力抵抗的两种形态。这是两个时代的精神象征，也是人类良知的两盏明灯。在我们开始之前，先想一个问题：如果有人欺压你，你会选择还手吗？还是选择另一条路？这两位大师给了我们不同的答案，让我们一起听听他们的故事。先从甘地说起，他的全名是莫罕达斯·甘地，出生在1869年，地点在印度西部一个靠海的小城。他的家境算是小康，父亲是地方上的官员，为人正直又受人敬重，母亲非常虔诚，信奉印度教，常常斋戒与祷告。这份虔诚深深影响了他。小时候的甘地很害羞，甚至有点胆小，他怕黑，也怕鬼怪，晚上不敢一个人睡，读书成绩很普通，不算特别出色。谁也想不到，这个内向的孩子日后会撼动大英帝国。少年甘地也犯过错，他曾经偷过家里的钱，也偷偷尝过肉，那是宗教禁止的事。他内心非常自责。有一次他写了一封信，向父亲坦白所有过错，他怕得发抖，没想到父亲没有责骂，父亲只是默默流下眼泪，那滴眼泪比责备更深刻。他明白了一个道理，真诚的爱能感化人心，比任何惩罚都有用。甘地一辈子记得这一幕，他从此学会了诚实，也学会了忏悔的力量。甘地13岁就结婚了，妻子叫卡斯杜白，那是当时的习俗。两人后来相伴一生。19岁那年，甘地远赴英国，他到伦敦学法律。出发前他答应母亲3件事：不碰酒，不吃肉，不近女色。在那陌生的城市里，他努力守住每一个承诺。他甚至加入了素食协会，也第一次认真读经典。他读了印度教的保加梵歌，也读了基督教的圣经。他发现各种信仰相通，这些思想日后影响深远。学成之后他回到印度，却发现自己很不顺利。他个性内向，第一次站上法庭，他紧张到一句话都说不出来，只好尴尬地离开。他的事业一度陷入低谷。就在这个时候，1893年，一个机会找上门，他被派往南非工作，处理一桩商业官司。他以为只是短暂出差，没想到这一趟彻底改变了他的一生。在南非他遭遇了歧视。有一次他坐火车，他买的是头等车厢的票，却因为肤色被赶下车，他的行李被丢到月台。那一夜他在车站发抖，又冷又屈辱。他在黑暗中问自己，我该忍气吞声离开吗？还是该留下来抗争？那一夜他想了很久，最后他做了决定，他要留下来对抗不公。从那一刻起，一个律师变成了斗士。他在南非住了20多年，他为印度侨民争取权利。当时政府推出恶法，要求所有印度人登记指纹，还要随身携带证件。甘地号召大家公开抗命，许多人把证件烧掉，宁愿坐牢也不屈服。他发展出一套全新的方法，这套方法叫做真理坚固，也就是非暴力抵抗。核心理念有2个，一个是坚持真理，一个是绝不伤害。他相信爱能胜过恨，他相信忍耐能融化暴力。这不是软弱，这是极大的勇气。他带领群众和平抗争，不还手，不仇恨，只是坚定地说不，就算被打也不退缩。他在南非建立了修行农场，他和同志过着共有的生活，大家一起耕种劳动，不分贫富与阶级。他把自己当成实验的对象，他不断检视内心的欲望。晚年他写下一本自传，书名就叫我对真理的实验。他诚实记下自己的软弱， 这份坦白令人敬佩。1915年，甘地回到印度，此时他已小有名气，人们开始叫他圣雄。这个称号意思是伟大的灵魂。回国后，他没有住进豪宅，他建立了一个修行的村落。他走遍印度的乡村，他看见农民的苦难，他看见穷人的辛酸。他脱下西装，换上最简单的衣服，他亲手纺纱织布，那台纺车成了他的象征。他号召人民自己织布，拒绝购买英国的工厂货。这小小的纺车后来印在了印度的国旗草案上，它代表自力更生，也代表对殖民的无声反抗。他要和最穷的人站在一起。他过着极简的生活，他不要财富，也不要名位。他每天祷告与沉思，他饮食非常清淡，只吃蔬果与谷物。他还立下禁欲的誓言，他要把全部精力献给众人。他特别关心最底层的人。印度有一群所谓的贱民，被社会看不起，甘地却称他们为神的子民。他要打破不平等的阶级，他认为人人生而平等。接下来的20多年，甘地领导印度争取独立。他发起不合作运动，他号召人民拒绝英国货，他要大家自己生产棉布，他要大家拒绝英国的学校，也拒绝英国的法庭。这是一场全民的觉醒。最有名的一次行动是1930年的食盐进军。当时英国垄断食盐，还课很重的税，穷人连盐都买不起。甘地决定亲自走到海边，他带着一群追随者，从内陆一路步行，走了将近400公里，沿途越来越多人加入，队伍像一条长河。他要亲手取海水制盐，这是公然违抗英国法律。这趟路走了20多天，全世界都在看。这个瘦小的老人拿起一把盐，就撼动了整个帝国。这次行动之后，数万人跟着被捕入狱，监狱都快关不下了。英国终于坐上谈判桌，全世界看见了和平的力量。当然反抗的代价很高，甘地多次被捕入狱，他在牢里待了好几年，但他从不抱怨。他把牢房当成修行的地方。他最厉害的武器是绝食，每当局势失控，他就以绝食求和平。他的身体越来越虚弱，但他的意志从未动摇。全国都为他的安危揪心。他总是说，以眼还眼，只会让全世界都瞎掉。他要用爱来回应仇恨，他要用苦行唤醒人心。1947年，印度终于独立，这是甘地毕生的梦想。然而独立也带来分裂，印度和巴基斯坦分家，印度教徒和穆斯林互相仇杀，无数人在动乱中丧命。甘地非常痛心，这不是他想要的自由。他到处奔走，他走进最危险的地方，他用绝食求取和平。他不要报复，他只要不同信仰的人和解。他的绝食真的奏效了，许多地方因此停止了流血。可惜悲剧还是发生了。1948年1月，甘地在前往祷告的路上，被人开枪刺杀身亡。凶手是激进的同胞，不满他对穆斯林太宽容。甘地倒下的那一刻，据说他口中喊着神的名字。他没有怨恨凶手，这位非暴力的圣者，最后死于暴力。全世界为他哀悼。他活了78岁，他的精神却流传至今。说完甘地，我们把目光转向南非，转向另一位巨人，他叫纳尔逊·曼德拉。他出生在1918年，地点在南非东部的乡村。他出生时有一个本名，这个名字的意思很有趣，意思接近爱惹麻烦的人，仿佛预言了他的一生。纳尔逊是上学后取的名字。有趣的是，那一年甘地还在南非奋斗，仿佛命运悄悄牵起一条线。曼德拉出身不凡，他来自部落的王族，父亲是当地的酋长。从小他被寄予厚望，小时候他在草原上放牛，过着自由自在的日子。父亲过世后，他被族里的摄政王抚养，族人希望他长大当顾问，他却选择了另一条路，为的是逃避被安排的婚姻。他离家前往大城市，他去读大学，后来又苦读法律。 他在约翰尼斯堡开了事务所，那是南非少见的黑人律师。他亲眼看见种族隔离的残酷。这里要说一个巧合，1948年甘地过世，也是同一年，南非正式推行种族隔离，白人政府用法律分隔种族，黑人没有投票权，不能自由居住，不能进好的学校，不能做好的工作，连走在路上都要带证件，不同肤色不能通婚，公园长椅都要分开坐，这是极不公平的制度，数百万人活在屈辱里。曼德拉决定反抗，他加入了非洲民族议会，也就是非国大。他和朋友组织了青年联盟。一开始他学甘地，他主张和平抗争，他发起蔑视不义法律的运动，他号召群众和平违法，故意去坐白人的位子，故意违反隔离规定，宁愿被抓也要表达抗议。他相信非暴力的力量。这时候的曼德拉很像年轻的甘地，但南非的局势更残酷。1960年发生了惨案，在一个叫沙佩维尔的地方，一群人和平抗议恶法，警察却向群众开枪，许多人中弹倒地，还有人是背对着被射杀。这件事震惊了世界，也让曼德拉彻底改变想法。他发现光靠和平不够，政府根本不讲道理，和平抗争只换来子弹。于是曼德拉做了一个决定，这也是他和甘地最大的不同。他和同志成立了武装组织，名字叫民族之矛。他开始准备武装抵抗，不过他定下严格的原则，一开始只破坏设施，炸电塔，炸铁轨，尽量不伤害人命。他不是嗜血的人，他只是被逼到绝境。他认为自由值得用一切去争取，为的是躲避追捕。他乔装改扮四处奔走，人们叫他黑色的影子。代价很快就来了。1962年曼德拉被捕，接着是著名的审判。他在法庭上发表演说，他说他珍惜民主的理想，他愿意为这个理想而活，如果必要，他也愿意为他而死。这段话震撼了全世界。他明明面对死刑的威胁，却毫无惧色。他把法庭变成了讲台，他为全体黑人发声。旁听席上一片寂静，连法官都被他的气势震慑。他被判处无期徒刑。那一年他40多岁，他被关进一座孤岛，那就是有名的罗本岛。曼德拉在牢里待了多久？答案是27年，这是非常惊人的数字。他在采石场做苦工，强烈的阳光伤了他的眼睛。他住在窄小的牢房，睡的是冰冷的地板。他失去了自由，失去了陪伴家人的时光。他的母亲过世时，他不能去奔丧。他的长子车祸离世，他也只能默默承受。但他没有失去希望。他在狱中读书，他在狱中锻炼身体，他甚至开始学敌人的语言。他学南非荷兰语，他想理解对手的想法。他在狱中赢得了狱卒的尊敬，这份气度非常惊人。在狱中他从不低头，他坚持要被当人对待。他的妻子温妮在外奔走，她替丈夫撑起整个运动。到了后期，政府偷偷派人和他谈判，他们发现这个囚犯比想象中更有智慧，也更值得信赖。双方慢慢建立了互信，谈判的大门终于打开，和平有了一线曙光。时间慢慢改变了一切，全世界开始声援曼德拉，各国抵制南非的商品，歌手为他写歌，群众为他游行。南非的制度撑不下去了，新上任的白人总统明白，旧时代必须结束了。1990年，曼德拉终于走出监狱。那一年他70多岁，全世界透过电视观看，一个白发苍苍的老人，牵着妻子的手，微笑着举起拳头。那一刻无数人落泪。走出监狱的曼德拉，做了一件了不起的事。他没有选择报复，被关了27年，换成别人可能恨之入骨。但曼德拉选择原谅，他选择和解。他和白人政府坐下谈判，他要建立一个新南非，一个黑人和白人共存的国家。他知道仇恨只会带来内战，唯有宽恕能让国家重生。 1993年，曼德拉获得诺贝尔和平奖。隔年南非举行大选，这是史上第一次，所有种族都能投票。许多黑人排了很长的队，就为的是投下人生第一票。有的老人等了一辈子，排队时忍不住流泪，那是尊严回来的眼泪。就职那天，连战斗机都飞过天空致敬，黑人与白人一起仰望，南非翻开了全新的一页。这个画面意义非凡。不久之前，这个人还是阶下囚，如今他却成了国家元首。历史有时候就是这么戏剧，正义虽然迟到，但终究还是来了。曼德拉当选总统，他成为南非第一位黑人总统，这是历史性的一刻。当上总统后，曼德拉做了一件大事，他成立真相与和解委员会，他让加害者说出真相，只要愿意坦白，就有机会获得宽恕。他也让受害者把痛苦说出来，他不要血腥的清算，他要的是愈合与前进。他还做了一件聪明的事，他支持白人最爱的橄榄球队，他穿上球队的球衣，让黑人和白人一起欢呼，用运动把分裂的国家连起来。那一年南非主办世界杯，过去黑人都讨厌这支球队，因为那是白人的象征，曼德拉却反其道而行。决赛那天，他穿上队长的球衣，走进满场的白人观众中，全场竟然高喊他的名字。最后南非奇迹般夺冠，黑人和白人一起拥抱欢呼，那一刻国家真正合而为一。他常说，怨恨像是自己喝毒药，却希望敌人死去。这句话充满智慧。更难得的是，曼德拉只当了一任总统，任期结束他就退下来。他没有贪恋权力，他把位子交给后人，这种风范非常稀有。晚年他投入慈善，关心艾滋病与儿童。2013年，曼德拉安详离世，享年95岁，全世界都为他送行，人们叫他南非的国父。现在我们把两个人放在一起，甘地和曼德拉，他们有好多相似的地方，他们都学过法律，他们都被不公激怒，他们都坐过很久的牢，他们都成为精神象征，他们都把和解看得很重，他们都不要无谓的仇恨，他们都活成了一个民族的良心。不过要记得一件事，他们也都是平凡的人。甘地承认自己有过挣扎，曼德拉也犯过错误，他们不是天生的圣人，他们是不断修正自己的人。正因为如此，他们的伟大更值得学习，因为我们也做得到，但他们也有不同。甘地坚持纯粹的非暴力，无论如何都不还手，就算被打死也不反抗。曼德拉则更务实，当和平之路被堵死，他选择拿起武器，但他始终守住底线，尽量不伤害无辜的人。这是两种不同的选择，也是两个时代的差异。甘地面对的是殖民帝国，英国至少还有舆论压力。曼德拉面对的是种族隔离，那是一个更封闭的政权。甘地最后死于暗杀，他的结局是悲剧。曼德拉则安享晚年，他亲眼看见理想实现。甘地像一盏烛火，照亮了道路然后熄灭。曼德拉像一棵大树，经历风雨终于开花结果。其实曼德拉深受甘地影响，他读过甘地的故事，他敬佩甘地的勇气。甘地在南非播下种子，几十年后在曼德拉身上发芽，这就是精神的传承。一个灵魂点燃另一个灵魂。不止曼德拉，美国的马丁路德金恩也学甘地，甘地的影响遍及全世界。那么，非暴力到底有没有用？这是个好问题。答案并不简单。甘地证明了爱的力量，他用和平赢得了独立。曼德拉则告诉我们，有时候现实更复杂，面对毫不讲理的暴力，单纯的忍耐未必足够，方法可以调整，但目标始终如一，那就是自由与尊严。历史学家常常争论，非暴力是不是太天真？但事实证明，这两个方法都成功了。印度脱离了殖民统治，南非结束了种族隔离，道德的力量确实存在，它比子弹走得更远。 也比仇恨活得更久。这就是两位大师的礼物，留给全人类最珍贵的功课，值得我们细细品味。两位大师留下同样的启示：真正的强大不是拳头，而是内心的坚定；真正的胜利不是消灭敌人，而是化敌为友。仇恨只会带来更多仇恨，唯有宽恕能终结循环。他们都明白一件事：革命的目的不是夺取权力，而是让人活得有尊严。这个道理跨越时代，也跨越国界。今天我们聊了甘地和曼德拉，两个伟大的灵魂，两种抵抗的形态。他们用一生告诉我们，一个人可以很渺小，一个人也可以很伟大。关键在于你为何而活，也在于你如何面对苦难。当世界对你不公的时候，你可以选择仇恨，也可以选择更高的道路。希望他们的故事能在你心里留下一点光。下次当你受了委屈，不妨想起这两位老人，想起那把盐，想起那27年，也许你会找到力量，用更温柔也更坚定的方式去面对这个世界。那才是真正的勇敢，也才是改变世界的开始。我们下次见咯。Hello everyone, I'm Jenny. Welcome to Thinker J. Today we are going to talk about two men. One of them came from India. The other one came from South Africa. They were separated by half a century, and yet their souls were strangely alike. One of them was called Gandhi. The other one was called Mandela. Both of these men spent their entire lives standing up against power. Both of them changed the very direction of history. Today the episode is something a little special. We are going to place these two great masters side by side, on the very same stage. We are going to look at two different forms of nonviolent resistance. These two men were the spiritual symbols of two different eras, and they remain two of the brightest lamps of human conscience. Before we begin, let me ask you a simple question. Imagine that someone is treating you unfairly, crushing you down, taking away your dignity. Would you choose to strike back at them? Or would you choose some other road entirely? These two masters gave us two very different answers to that question. So let us settle in, and let us listen to their stories together. Let us begin with Gandhi. His full name was Mohandas Gandhi. He was born in the year 1869, in a small coastal town in the western part of India. His family was reasonably comfortable, neither rich nor poor. His father was a local government official, a man known for being honest and widely respected. His mother was deeply religious. She was a devoted Hindu who fasted and prayed very often. That deep devotion left a lasting mark on the young boy. As a child, Gandhi was extremely shy. He was even a little timid. He was afraid of the dark, and he was afraid of ghosts. At night he did not dare to sleep alone. His grades at school were quite ordinary, nothing that stood out at all. Nobody could possibly have imagined that this quiet, introverted child would one day shake the entire British Empire. The young Gandhi made his share of mistakes too. On one occasion he stole a little money from his own home. He also secretly tasted meat, which was forbidden by his religion. His conscience tormented him terribly. One day he sat down and wrote a letter. In that letter he confessed every single one of his faults to his father. He was trembling with fear as he handed it over. To his great surprise, his father did not scold him at all. His father simply read the letter in silence, and then let the tears roll quietly down his cheeks. Those silent tears struck the boy far more deeply than any punishment ever could. Gandhi remembered that moment for the rest of his life. He understood a profound truth that day. Sincere love can soften the human heart far more effectively than any punishment. From that day forward, he learned the meaning of honesty, and he learned the power of true repentance. It is worth pausing on this small story for a moment. So much of what Gandhi would later become can be traced back to it. He did not believe that you defeat wrongdoing by crushing the wrongdoer. He believed that you reach the heart of the other person and let their own conscience do the work. That single idea, born from the tears of his father, would one day grow into a force that bent the will of an empire. Gandhi was married at the age of just 13. His wife was named Kasturba. That was simply the custom of the time and place. The two of them would go on to stay together for the rest of their lives. When he was 19 years old, Gandhi traveled all the way to England. He went to London in order to study law. Before he left, he made 3 solemn promises to his mother. He would not touch alcohol. He would not eat meat. He would not be with other women. In that strange and distant city, he worked very hard to keep every single one of those promises. He even joined a vegetarian society there. It was also in London that he first read the great spiritual classics with real seriousness. He read the Bhagavad Gita of the Hindu tradition. He also read the Bible of the Christian faith. He came to feel that the different religions of the world were speaking, in their own ways, about the same things. These ideas would shape him profoundly for the rest of his days. London was not an easy place for a shy young Indian student. He felt out of place and terribly homesick. For a time he even tried to dress and behave like a proper English gentleman, taking lessons in dancing and in elocution. But none of it suited him. Slowly he gave up the imitation and returned to who he truly was. That quiet rediscovery of himself was its own kind of turning point, a first small taste of the inner independence he would one day teach to millions. After finishing his studies, he returned home to India. But things did not go well for him at all. He was introverted by his very nature. The first time he stood up in a courtroom, he became so nervous that he could not get a single word out. He had to leave in embarrassment. His career sank into a deep and discouraging low point. And it was right at that moment, in the year 1893, that an unexpected opportunity arrived. He was offered work in South Africa, handling a commercial legal case. He assumed it would be nothing more than a short trip abroad. He could not have known that this single journey would completely change the entire course of his life. In South Africa, Gandhi came face to face with raw discrimination. One day he was traveling by train. He had purchased a first-class ticket, fair and square. Yet simply because of the color of his skin, he was thrown off the train. His luggage was tossed out onto the platform after him. That night he sat shivering at the railway station, cold and humiliated and alone. In the darkness he asked himself a hard question. Should he simply swallow his pride and go quietly away? Or should he stay and fight against this injustice? He thought about it for a long, long time that night. And in the end he made his decision. He would stay, and he would resist what was wrong. From that single moment, a timid lawyer began to transform into a fearless fighter. He has often said that this night was the most creative experience of his life. The humiliation could have made him bitter. Instead it made him resolute. He did not hate the man who had thrown him from the train. He hated the system that had made such a thing possible. And he set his mind on changing that system, not with anger, but with a patience so deep that it could outlast any oppressor. He ended up living in South Africa for more than 20 years. During that time he fought for the rights of the Indian community there. At one point the government introduced a cruel new law. It demanded that all Indians register their fingerprints. It also required them to carry identity papers at all times. Gandhi called on his people to openly defy that law. Many of them gathered together and burned their papers in public. They were willing to go to prison rather than submit. It was here that Gandhi developed a completely new method of struggle. He gave this method the name satyagraha, which means holding firmly to truth. In plain language, it was nonviolent resistance. The whole idea rested upon two pillars. One pillar was the firm insistence on truth. The other pillar was the absolute refusal to cause harm. He believed that love could overcome hatred. He believed that patience could melt away violence. This was not weakness at all. This was an enormous and rare form of courage. He led ordinary people in peaceful protest. They did not strike back. They did not hate. They simply stood firm and said no, again and again, even when they were beaten for it. It was in South Africa that Gandhi also built a farm where his followers lived a shared and simple life. They worked the land together and held everything in common. There was no rich and no poor among them, no high and no low. Gandhi treated his own self as the subject of an ongoing experiment. He constantly examined the desires of his own heart. Late in life he would write down a famous autobiography. He gave that book the title The Story of My Experiments with Truth. In it he honestly recorded even his own weaknesses and failures. That kind of complete honesty is something truly worthy of admiration. In the year 1915, Gandhi returned home to India for good. By this time he was already becoming famous. People had begun to call him Mahatma. That noble title means great soul. After he returned, he did not move into some grand mansion. Instead he established a humble community devoted to spiritual practice. He traveled across the villages of India on foot. He saw the suffering of the farmers with his own eyes. He saw the bitterness of the poor. He took off his fine Western suit. He put on the simplest possible clothing. He spun his own thread and he wove his own cloth by hand. That spinning wheel became his lifelong symbol. He called upon the people to weave their own cloth and to refuse the factory goods of the British. That small and humble spinning wheel would later appear even on an early draft of the national flag. It came to represent self-reliance, and it came to represent a silent and dignified resistance against colonial rule. He wanted to stand together with the very poorest of the poor. He lived a life of extreme simplicity. He did not want wealth. He did not want titles or status. Every single day he prayed and he sat in deep reflection. His diet was extremely plain. He ate only vegetables and fruit and grain. He also took a solemn vow of celibacy. He wanted to devote every ounce of his energy to the service of all people. He cared in particular about those at the very bottom of society. In India there was a group of people often called the untouchables. They were looked down upon and despised by everyone around them. Gandhi instead called them the children of God. He wanted to shatter the cruel inequality of the caste system. He believed with all his heart that all human beings are born equal, and that no person should ever be held above or below another because of birth. Over the next 2 decades, Gandhi led India in its long struggle for independence. He launched the Great Non-Cooperation Movement. He called on the people to refuse all British goods. He told them to produce their own cotton cloth instead. He told them to refuse the British schools. He told them to refuse the British courts. It was an awakening of an entire nation. His most famous single action of all came in the year 1930. It was the Great Salt March. At that time the British held a complete monopoly on salt. They also placed a very heavy tax upon it. The poor could barely even afford to buy salt for their own food. Gandhi decided to walk all the way to the sea himself. He set out on foot with a small band of followers. They walked from the inland, step after step, covering nearly 400 kilometers. As they walked, more and more people joined them along the way. The procession grew until it looked like a long flowing river of humanity. He intended to gather seawater and to make salt with his own 2 hands. This was an act of open and deliberate defiance against British law. The march went on for more than 20 days. The entire world was watching closely. This small and frail old man picked up a single handful of salt, and with it he shook an entire empire. After this action, tens of thousands of people followed his example and were thrown into prison. The jails could barely hold them all. In the end the British were forced to sit down at the negotiating table. The whole world had seen, with its own eyes, the power of peace. Newspapers in distant countries printed photographs of the marching crowds. People who had never heard of this man before now knew his face and his name. The genius of the Salt March was its simplicity. Salt was something every single person needed, rich and poor alike. By choosing such an ordinary thing, Gandhi made the injustice of the empire impossible to ignore. He showed that the mightiest power on earth could be challenged by an unarmed old man and a pinch of salt from the sea. Of course, all of this resistance came at a very heavy price. Gandhi was arrested and imprisoned many times over. He spent several years of his life behind bars. Yet he never once complained about it. He treated the prison cell as just another place for his spiritual practice. His single most powerful weapon was the hunger strike. Whenever a situation spun out of control, he would fast in order to bring back the peace. His body would grow weaker and weaker with each fast. But his iron will never once wavered. The whole nation would hold its breath in worry over his safety. He often said that an eye for an eye only ends up making the entire world go blind. He wanted to answer hatred with love. He wanted to awaken the conscience of others through his own suffering. In the year 1947, India finally won its independence. This had been the dream of the entire life of Gandhi. And yet that independence also brought a terrible division. India and Pakistan were torn apart from each other. Hindus and Muslims fell into dreadful slaughter against one another. Countless people lost their lives in the chaos. Gandhi was utterly heartbroken. This was not the freedom that he had wanted. He rushed from one place to another. He walked straight into the most dangerous regions. He fasted yet again in the desperate hope of bringing peace. He did not want revenge. He wanted only for people of different faiths to reconcile. And his fasting actually worked. In many places the bloodshed came to a halt because of it. But tragedy still came in the end. In January of the year 1948, as Gandhi was walking to his evening prayers, a man stepped forward and shot him dead. The killer was a radical from among his own countrymen, a man who felt that Gandhi had been far too kind toward the Muslims. In the very moment that Gandhi fell to the ground, it is said that he cried out the name of God. He held no hatred toward his killer. To forgive in the very act of dying may be the purest expression of everything he had ever taught. This saint of nonviolence died, in the very end, by an act of violence. The entire world mourned for him. He had lived to the age of 78. And yet his spirit has lived on, all the way down to our own day. At his funeral, an ocean of people filled the streets to say farewell. A famous scientist of the age remarked that generations to come would scarcely believe that such a man, in flesh and blood, had ever walked upon this earth. That, perhaps, is the truest measure of how rare he was. Now that we have spoken of Gandhi, let us turn our eyes toward South Africa. Let us turn toward another giant of a man. His name was Nelson Mandela. He was born in the year 1918, in a rural village in the eastern part of South Africa. Here is something rather striking. In that very same year, Gandhi was still living and working in South Africa. It is almost as though fate had quietly tied a single thread between these two men. One of them was nearing the end of his time in that country, his ideas already fully formed. The other was just beginning his life, a baby in a village who knew nothing yet of struggle or prison. And yet the road that one had built would, decades later, become the road the other would walk. Mandela came from no ordinary background. He was descended from a tribal royal family. His father was a local chief. From his earliest childhood, great things were expected of him. As a boy he herded cattle out on the open grasslands, living a free and easy kind of life. When he was given his name at birth, that name carried an interesting meaning. It meant something close to one who stirs up trouble. In a strange way it seemed to predict his entire life. The name Nelson was only given to him later, once he started going to school. After his father passed away, he was raised by the regent of his people. His relatives hoped that one day he would grow up to serve as a royal advisor. But Mandela chose another road altogether. In order to escape an arranged marriage, he left home and went off to the big city. He went to university. Later he studied law through years of hard effort. He opened his own law office in the city of Johannesburg. He was one of the very few black lawyers in all of South Africa. And with his own eyes, he witnessed the cruelty of racial segregation every single day. Here we must pause to note a remarkable coincidence. In the year 1948, the very same year that Gandhi died, South Africa formally introduced the system known as apartheid. The white government used the law itself to separate the races. Black people had no right to vote. They were not free to live wherever they wished. They could not attend the good schools. They could not take the good jobs. They even had to carry identity papers just to walk down the street. People of different colors were forbidden to marry each other. Even the benches in the public parks were divided by race. It was a deeply and profoundly unjust system. Millions upon millions of people lived their entire lives steeped in humiliation. Mandela decided that he would resist. He joined the African National Congress, an organization often known simply as the ANC. Together with his friends he organized a youth league. At the very beginning, he followed in the footsteps of Gandhi. He argued for peaceful protest. He launched what came to be called the Defiance Campaign against the unjust laws. He called upon the people to break those laws in a peaceful way. They would deliberately sit in the seats reserved for white people. They would deliberately violate the rules of segregation. They were willing to be arrested in order to make their protest heard. He truly believed in the power of nonviolence. In this period of his life, Mandela looked very much like the young Gandhi had once looked. He believed, as Gandhi had believed, that if enough people refused to obey an unjust law, that law would eventually collapse under the weight of its own cruelty. He filled the prisons with volunteers. He gave speeches that drew enormous crowds. For a time it seemed that patience and moral courage might be enough to win the day. But the situation inside South Africa was far more brutal. In the year 1960, a massacre took place. It happened in a township called Sharpeville. A crowd of people had gathered to protest peacefully against the hated pass laws. The police opened fire on that crowd. Many people were struck down by the bullets. Some of them were even shot in the back as they tried to flee. This terrible event shocked the entire world. And it utterly transformed the thinking of Mandela. He realized that peaceful methods alone were simply not going to be enough. The government would not listen to reason at all. Peaceful protest had been answered only with bullets. And so Mandela made a fateful decision. This is also the single greatest difference between him and Gandhi. Together with his comrades, he helped to create an armed organization. It was given the name Umkhonto we Sizwe, which means the spear of the nation. He began to prepare for armed resistance. Yet even here he laid down very strict principles. In the beginning the group would target only facilities and infrastructure. They blew up electrical pylons. They blew up railway lines. They tried their very hardest never to take a human life. Mandela was not a man who thirsted for blood. He had simply been pushed into a corner with no other way out. He had come to believe that freedom was worth fighting for with everything one had. In order to escape the police who were hunting him, he disguised himself and moved constantly from place to place. People began to call him the Black Shadow who could never be caught. The price came very quickly. In the year 1962, Mandela was arrested. Then came his famous trial. He stood up in the courtroom and delivered a speech that would never be forgotten. He said that he cherished the ideal of a democratic society. He said that he hoped to live for that ideal. But if it became necessary, he was also fully prepared to die for it. Those words shook the entire world. He was facing the very real threat of a death sentence, and yet he showed no fear at all. He turned that courtroom into a kind of stage. He spoke for all of the black people of his nation. The whole gallery sat in absolute silence. Even the judge seemed shaken by the sheer force of his presence. In the end, he was sentenced to life in prison. He was already in his 40s at the time. He was sent away to a lonely island. That island was the famous Robben Island. It sat in the cold waters off the coast, a place chosen precisely because it was so cut off from the rest of the world. The men who governed South Africa believed that if they buried Mandela there, his name would slowly fade from memory and his cause would die with him. They could not have been more wrong. The island did not erase him. It made him into a legend. How long did Mandela remain behind those bars? The answer is 27 years. That is a truly staggering and almost unimaginable number. He did hard manual labor in a limestone quarry. The fierce glare of the sun off the white stone permanently damaged his eyes. He lived in a tiny and narrow cell. He slept on a cold stone floor. He lost his freedom. He lost all of the years he could have spent with his family. When his own mother passed away, he was not permitted to attend her funeral. When his eldest son died in a car accident, he could do nothing but bear the grief in silence. But through all of it, he never lost his hope. In prison he read books constantly. In prison he kept his body strong with exercise. He even began to learn the language of his enemies. He studied Afrikaans. He wanted to understand exactly how his opponents thought. Inside that prison he even won the respect of the very guards who watched over him. This breadth of spirit was something truly astonishing. Inside those walls he never once bowed his head. He insisted, always, on being treated as a human being. His wife Winnie carried on the work outside, traveling and organizing in his place, holding up the entire movement on her own shoulders. In the later years, the government secretly began to send people to negotiate with him. They discovered that this prisoner was far wiser than they had ever imagined, and far more worthy of their trust. Slowly, a sense of mutual trust began to take shape between the two sides. The door to negotiation finally swung open. Peace at last had a faint ray of dawn. Slowly, time changed everything. The whole world began to rally behind Mandela. Country after country boycotted the goods of South Africa. Musicians wrote songs in his honor. Crowds marched in the streets demanding his freedom. The old system simply could no longer hold itself together. The newly elected white president understood, at last, that the old era had to come to an end. In the year 1990, Mandela finally walked out of prison. He was already in his 70s by then. People all over the world watched the moment on television. An old man with a full head of white hair, holding the hand of his wife, smiled and raised his fist into the air. In that single moment, countless people around the globe wept. The Mandela who walked out of prison did something truly remarkable. He did not choose the path of revenge. He had been locked away for 27 long years. In his place, very many people would have been completely consumed by hatred. But Mandela chose to forgive. He chose the road of reconciliation. He sat down at the table to negotiate with the white government. He wanted to build a brand new South Africa. He wanted a nation where black people and white people could live together. He understood clearly that hatred would only lead to a civil war. He knew that only forgiveness could allow the country to be reborn. In the year 1993, Mandela was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The very next year, South Africa held a general election. It was the first time in the entire history of the country that people of all races were able to vote. Many black people stood in lines that stretched on for hours and hours, simply to cast the very first vote of their lives. Some of the elderly among them had waited their whole lives for this single moment. As they stood in those long lines, they could not hold back their tears. Those were the tears of a dignity that had finally come home. Mandela was elected president. He became the first black president of South Africa. It was a truly historic moment. On the day of his inauguration, even fighter jets roared across the sky in tribute. Black people and white people gazed up at them together. South Africa had turned to a brand new page. The meaning of that scene was extraordinary. Only a short time before, this very man had been a prisoner. And now he had become the head of state of the whole nation. History, sometimes, is exactly that dramatic. Justice had arrived late, but in the end it had still arrived. After he became president, Mandela did something enormous. He set up what was called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He allowed those who had done wrong to come forward and confess the truth. As long as a person was willing to be honest, there was a chance for that person to receive forgiveness. He also allowed the victims to speak their pain aloud. He did not want a bloody settling of old scores. What he wanted was healing, and a way to move forward. He also did something very clever and very wise. He gave his open support to the rugby team that the white population loved so dearly. That year South Africa was hosting the Rugby World Cup. In the past, black people had hated that team, because it had always been a symbol of white power. Mandela did exactly the opposite of what everyone expected. On the day of the final, he put on the jersey of the team captain. He walked out into a stadium packed with white spectators. And to the astonishment of all, the entire crowd began to chant his name. In the end, South Africa won the championship in an almost miraculous fashion. Black people and white people embraced and cheered together as one. In that single moment, the nation truly became whole. He often said that resentment is like drinking poison yourself, while hoping that your enemy will be the one to die. Those words are full of deep wisdom. He understood something that very few leaders ever truly grasp. The deepest wound of injustice is not only the physical harm. It is the way it poisons the spirit of the one who suffers, filling the heart with a bitterness that can last for generations. To break that cycle, someone has to be willing to lay the bitterness down first. Mandela chose to be that someone. He carried 27 years of suffering, and instead of passing it on, he set it down for the sake of his nation. Even more remarkable was this. Mandela served only a single term as president. When that term came to an end, he stepped down from power. He did not cling to his position at all. He handed it over to the next generation. This kind of grace is something extremely rare in this world. In his later years he devoted himself to charitable work. He cared deeply about the fight against disease and about the welfare of children. In the year 2013, Mandela passed away peacefully. He was 95 years old. The whole world came together to send him on his final journey. People called him the father of the South African nation. Now let us place these two men side by side. Gandhi and Mandela. They share so very many things in common. Both of them studied law. Both of them were stirred to a deep anger by injustice. Both of them spent long years in prison. Both of them became spiritual symbols. Both of them placed an enormous value upon reconciliation. Neither of them wanted any pointless hatred. Both of them lived their lives as the conscience of an entire people. But there is one thing we must always remember. Both of these men were also ordinary human beings. Gandhi himself admitted that he had inner struggles. Mandela himself made mistakes along the way. They were not born as saints. They were men who constantly corrected and improved themselves. And it is precisely because of this that their greatness is so worth learning from. Because it means that we, too, are capable of the same thing. But of course they were also different from each other. Gandhi held firmly to a pure and absolute nonviolence. No matter what happened, he would not strike back. Even if he were beaten to death, he would not raise a hand in return. Mandela, on the other hand, was more pragmatic. When the road of peace was completely blocked, he chose to take up arms. Yet even then he always held to a clear moral line. He tried his hardest never to harm an innocent person. These were two very different choices. And they were also a difference between two very different eras. Gandhi was facing a colonial empire. The British, at the very least, were still subject to the pressure of public opinion. Mandela was facing the system of apartheid. That was a far more closed and ruthless regime. Gandhi died, in the end, by assassination. His ending was a tragedy. Mandela, by contrast, was able to enjoy his later years in peace. He lived to see his own ideal become a reality with his own eyes. Gandhi was like a single candle flame. He lit up the road ahead, and then he went out. Mandela was like a great and mighty tree. After weathering wind and storm, he finally blossomed and bore his fruit. In truth, Mandela was deeply influenced by Gandhi. He had read the story of the life of Gandhi. He admired the courage of Gandhi. Gandhi had planted a seed in the soil of South Africa. And decades later, that very seed sprouted to life inside Mandela. This is what we mean by the passing on of a spirit. One soul lights the flame within another soul. And it was not only Mandela. In America, Martin Luther King also learned from Gandhi. The influence of Gandhi spread out across the entire world. So then, does nonviolence actually work? That is a very good question. The answer is not a simple one. Gandhi proved the power of love. He won his independence through peaceful means. Mandela, on the other hand, showed us something else. Sometimes reality is far more complicated. When you are facing a violence that will not listen to any reason, simple patience may not be enough on its own. The method can be adjusted. But the goal always stays exactly the same. That goal is freedom and dignity. Historians often argue about whether nonviolence is simply too naive. But the facts themselves prove something. Both of these methods, in the end, succeeded. India broke free from colonial rule. South Africa brought an end to apartheid. The power of morality truly does exist. It travels farther than any bullet. And it lives on far longer than any hatred. Neither of these men won an easy victory. Gandhi waited decades and died before he could see his country at peace. Mandela waited 27 years inside a cell before the world finally listened. Their patience was not weakness, and it was not passivity. It was a fierce and active refusal to let injustice define who they would become. That is the hardest kind of strength there is. The two masters left us with the very same lesson. True strength does not lie in the fist. It lies in the firmness of the heart. True victory is not about destroying your enemy. It is about turning an enemy into a friend. Hatred only ever brings more hatred. Only forgiveness can break the endless cycle. Both of these men understood one thing clearly. The purpose of a revolution is not to seize power. The purpose is to let people live with dignity. This truth reaches across all the ages. And it reaches across all the borders of the world. Today we have talked about Gandhi and Mandela. Two great souls. Two forms of resistance. Through their lives they tell us something important. A single person can be very small. And a single person can also be very great. What matters is the question of what you choose to live for. And what matters is the question of how you choose to face your suffering. When the world treats you unfairly, you can choose hatred. Or you can choose the higher road. The next time you feel that you have been wronged, perhaps you will think of these two old men. Think of that single handful of salt. Think of those 27 long years. And perhaps you will find the strength within yourself to face this world in a way that is both gentler and firmer at the same time. That is what real courage looks like. And that is where the changing of the world begins. And so, when your own moment of unfairness comes, remember that you stand in a long line of people who chose the higher road. You do not have to be a saint to walk it. You only have to take the next step, and then the one after that. I hope that their stories can leave just a little bit of light inside your heart. See you next time.